We're going to get started. My name is Sarah Britt, and I am the data project manager at ICPSR that helps run the Patient-Centered Outcomes Data Repository, or PCORI. And today, my colleague John Audley from PCORI and I will be presenting an overview of PCORI's data sharing policy and data repository. Thank you so much for attending. And John, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to learn more about the Patient-Centered Outcomes Data Repository and our data sharing policy at PCORI. Next slide, please. So I'll start with a quick introduction. My name is John Audley. I'm a program associate at PCORI in the Clinical Effectiveness and Decision Science program, and I've helped oversee the implementation of PCORI's data sharing policy the past 2 years. So I'm going to give you a broad overview of the data sharing policy and the current status of PCORI. Next slide, please. So here is a quick overview of some of our objectives for today. I'm going to talk about the development of the policy, some of the key features, some of the learnings from our implementation over the past couple of years and the current status of PCORI, and then I'll pass it off to Sarah to talk more about what makes PCORI unique. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one more. Thank you. So before I dive into PCORI's data sharing policy and the current status of PCORI, I do want to provide a brief overview of PCORI for those of you that might not be familiar and the type of research that we fund. So as stated at the top of this slide, we're an independent research institute authorized by Congress in 2010, and then again reauthorized in 2019. And we're comprised of a board of governors of 23 members representing the entire healthcare community. And at our core, we fund comparative clinical effectiveness research that engages patients and other stakeholders throughout the process. So when we talk about clinical effectiveness research, this is research comparing 2 or more interventions with known efficacy or are in common use. And that is the bulk of the research that we fund at PCORI. And we're ultimately seeking to answer real world questions about what works best for patients given their unique circumstances and their concerns. So on the right side of the slide here, you can see an overview of our portfolio, the bulk of it being CER research totaling over $2.6 billion. On the right, you can see a breakdown by the most studied conditions and most studied populations of interest. So, quite a breadth of clinical topics that we fund. And then we also fund methodological research and research infrastructure projects as pictured in that diagram on the left side. And I invite you, if you're curious about our portfolio, have any questions, you can go to our website and get an idea for the sort of research that we fund. Next slide, please. So in order to maximize the utility and usability of the research that we fund, PCORI developed our policy for data management and data sharing. This was informed by public comment on the policy, expert consultations, conversations with other funders and regulatory agencies. And this was officially approved back in September of 2018. At the top of the slide here, you can see some of the guiding values that led to the development and approval of the policy, again, to maximize the utility and usability of data collected, but then also to encourage rigorous secondary use of clinical data of the research that we fund to answer new questions in different ways. Shortly after the approval of the policy, there was an open call for repository partners, and we selected ICPSR, who's been a wonderful partner thus far. And after selection of ICPSR, there was a time where we built out PCORI and then conducted some pilot studies before we expanded the implementation of the policy to the entire portfolio of PCORI studies, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So before I get more into the implementation, I do want to review some of the key requirements and features of the policy. So on the left side here, obviously the policy speaks to which awardees are required to participate in data sharing, which I will talk a little bit more later on the presentation. But then it also specifies which data and data documentation is to be shared. In the policy, we stipulate that the full data package, which consists of the data set, the supporting documents such as the protocol, codebook, data dictionary, analytic code, and metadata, and the thinking behind requiring this full constellation of data and data documentation is we really want to provide requesters a comprehensive picture, when they come in to utilize the data that's ultimately deposited. We want to minimize any hand-holding on part of the data generator. The policy also stipulates that, we recognize a great deal of work goes into data sharing, and that work is funded by PCORI. And then lastly, it speaks to the process for how the data is going to be made available. It's not public access, as Sarah will speak to in her part of the presentation. The data requests do need to go through and review by an independent review committee. And then also we recognize that there might be certain restrictions for some of the project awardees that we fund, and those are subject to, they may apply for exemptions from the policy. On the right side, you can see some of the privacy and ethical protections that are written into the policy. We require only de-identified data in accordance with the HIPAA privacy rule. There's strict prohibition against re-identification of individuals and redistribution of data, which I believe is captured in the data use agreement that Sarah will mention. And then, we require from the onset of the study that data sharing be written into the consent forms of, all the participants that will be enrolled in the study that data are collected on. So next slide, please. So this is a continuation of some of the features of the policy, and I wanted to highlight the release of the study data. Upon completion of the PCORI funded study, we then enter the time whenever the awardee is working with ICPSR to deposit and curate the data. And then once that curation is complete, the data is not released to the public or available for request until one of two things are triggered. Either the final research report is made available on PCORI's website, or the primary results are published in a peer-reviewed journal, whichever comes first. In our discussions early on, we recognized that awardees did not want that premature release of data, so that was written into the policy. And then the second half of the slide speaks to the data use request process, which consists of an independent review committee of 5 individuals, an ICPSR representative, a PCORI representative, a data scientist, a clinical researcher with germane expertise, and then a patient representative. So when data use requests come in to use the deposited data, this committee will then review the request for scientific merit and, just ensuring that the requester has the scientific skills to, conduct the research that they're proposing. A member of the awardee research team, whether that be the PI or a designated individual, will be made aware of the request when it comes in. They won't have a voting role on the board, but certainly their insight will be taken into consideration during the review of the request. And then in an effort to be fully transparent about the secondary request use that come in, all approved requests will be posted on the PCODR website. And then I believe it's 12 months after the research has been either the request has been approved or the research has been done, that those results will then be published on PCODR. So, just trying to be fully transparent about the research that is being analyzed. Next slide, please. So I provided a brief overview of the policy, and I do want to speak to the implementation thus far. So this is a high-level overview of all the work that's been done the past couple of years, starting with the policy's approval in 2018, identifying ICPSR as our designated repository partner, and then building up PCODR and conducting some pilot studies to do some initial learnings about, the workflow of data sharing activities. Following that, we've developed a set of template milestones that are included in all awardees' contracts that are participating in data sharing. And then we transitioned to a PCORI-wide implementation phase where we reached out to all the required awardees that were designated to participate in data sharing post its approval, and then also reaching out to awardees prior to the policy's approval to see if anyone would be interested in volunteering on or participating on a voluntary basis. So that was a big undertaking, and we also did a lot more of organizational learning to refine the workflow and processes. And that largely came to an end beginning of last year. So we started to enter this steady state of where all these processes are developed, and we have this constant flow of studies coming into PCODR. And that brings us to now to 2024, where we have a total of 12 studies deposited in PCODR with a number of other studies and currently in the queue. And again, we're expecting, a steady state of a steady flow of studies coming into PCODR over the coming years. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, which I believe is my last. This is, again, just a summary of the current state of PCODR. Right now, we have 12 studies, and those range in clinical focus from lower back pain to stroke to cardiovascular and mental health studies. Again, those clinical domains are going to expand over the coming years as more studies come in. And we're actually currently in the middle of a promotional campaign to really get the word out about PCODR and start increasing, usage and awareness over this valuable scientific asset. Currently, the repository is the only collection of its kind focused exclusively on patient-centered CER, so we're really excited to announce this to the larger community. And please, if this is of interest to you or any of your colleagues, please share the word. You can visit PCORI's data sharing webpage linked here on the slide. Or if you have any questions, you can reach out to PCORI's data sharing policy email pictured here on the slide. So thank you again for your time today and letting me provide this overview of PCORI and PCODR, and I'll pass it back over to Sarah to provide some more details. Thanks.
I've just been sharing some links in the chat from what John was speaking of during his part of the presentation. All right, so what makes PCODR unique? So this is a sort of a special archive at ICPSR that has expanded the things that we do at ICPSR. So it relies on what we've always done, which is support data from diverse backgrounds. And then we take it a step farther, and I'm going to highlight specifically the independent review committee and transparency. So as an overview, the repository functions for PCODR, we support data from diverse set of clinical studies. We have the ability to ingest and curate the PCORI grantee data efficiently. We've developed the agreements that John was speaking of, a data contributor agreement and a data use agreement. So the data contributor agreement is between U of M and the institution where the data is coming from, and that just sort of outlines what everyone's roles are and what we'll do with the data. And the data use agreement is for the secondary users. So the folks applying for the data, this outlines what they are and are not allowed to do. We also have a dedicated part of our website devoted to resources for data preparation. This helps the grantees who are required to deposit their data and the volunteer awardees sort of think through that process from start to finish. The second main function after we ingest and put out all the data is to provide users with secure access to the PCORI funded data. As John mentioned, we have the virtual data enclave. So that means that the data resides at the repository. So folks, once they're approved, log into a virtual machine that has limited access. It has no access to the internet or things like that to sort of safeguard, put another layer of safety around the data. Folks are trained before they use the virtual data enclave so that they understand what they are and are not allowed to do. And that's part of their data use agreement as well. And if when they're finished with their research, they have a way to request for us to vet their documentation to have it taken out of the virtual data enclave. So the data itself never leaves the virtual data enclave. We also manage the independent review committee to review the data use requests, which I'll go into further detail later on in this presentation. And we support research transparency around data reuse. So as John mentioned, approved requests are published on the repository website. That means that people are able to see what research is being done on these studies. And also summary findings from the authorized users are published on the repository website 12 months after their initial application is approved. And that includes null findings or where they're at. So just to talk about our current collection, as John mentioned, at this time we have 12 studies. We have actually another handful of studies that are ready for release once they hit that milestone that John mentioned of their final research report being published or their article being published in a peer-reviewed journal. We have over 9,000 variables, and we have 125 related publications. So that means that when you come to the PCORI website, not only can you see what studies are available to apply for, but you can also browse what variables are available to make sure that it would be a good fit for your research and to be able to fill out the application accurately. And you can see what research has already been done through those related publications. So now we're going to talk about the Independent Review Committee. A lot of archives at ICPSR just have in-house staff that review the applications and make recommendations and approvals. But PCORI is one of the first archives at ICPSR to utilize an Independent Review Committee. So individuals or a team seeking access to PCORI funded data make a data request through our virtual data enclave management system. So their request must include a statement of the proposed research purpose, assurance that the data requested will be used to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge, so not for commercial purposes or things like that, justification that the proposed research can be achieved using the requested data. That's why knowing what variables are in the data is important and what it covers through our metadata, and have their data security plan tailored to working in the virtual data enclave. That's part of that data user agreement. So once they fill out that application and there's guidance for them on how to do that, then the application is reviewed for completeness. They have to provide their CVs as well and IRB approval. And then completed applications are passed to the Independent Review Committee for their review, and then the Independent Review Committee meets. So the Independent Review Committee is comprised of 5 individuals, a representative from ICPSR, a data scientist, a clinical researcher with expertise on the data requested. So we have a working database that we can pull from for this person. So it's the only seat that really rotates depending on which data is being requested, a PCORI staff member, and a patient representative. So this team is the one that receives the application in its entirety and reviews it as a unit. They each provide feedback and their vote, and then there's discussion, and either we go back to the requester to give them additional feedback, or if we need clarification, or we let them know that they've been approved or denied. And as John mentioned, also the original research team has a representative that's invited to weigh in. They can do this over email. They can attend the meeting of the Independent Review Committee, but it's just to help provide more background on the study itself, since the PI is the best expert on their data. This person is a not voting member, so they can't sort of gatekeep who's using the study, but they can make recommendations or provide feedback on whether or not research, if the data has the variables needed to complete the research that's being proposed. This is what our Independent Review Committee currently looks like. We have a data scientist from U of M Bioinformatics. We have a patient advocate. Jason Gerson is the project officer for this archive and the PCORI representative on the IRC. And Lynette Holter is the co-PI here and is the ICPSR representative. And as I said, there is a 5th member, but that is sort of a rotating seat depending on the topical expert of whatever data is being requested at the time. So the Independent Review Committee is tasked with reviewing the application for scientific merit. So they are tasked with making sure that the scientific purpose is clearly described, that the data requested will be used to develop, to contribute to the generalizable knowledge to inform science, medicine, and or public health. As we said, you can't use PCORI data for legal or commercial purposes. The proposed research can be reasonably addressed using the requested data. The requester team has the appropriate expertise to conduct the proposed research. That's often where the CVs come in hand, and questions and outcomes are relevant to patients. There are prohibitions against re-identifications of individuals and redistribution of data that's wrapped into the data use agreement that the approved requesters enter into. So the DUA specifies the terms and conditions of data use, as well as the responsibilities and obligations of those data requesters, as we mentioned, which includes explicitly prohibiting re-identification. The other thing that makes PCORI unique at ICPSR is transparency. I think that has come up more and more, but in the past, sort of the only people who knew who was applying for data are the people in-house at ICPSR. So we have records of who is applying and using data, our restricted data at ICPSR, but PCORI takes that a step farther and makes it transparent. So we share the approved requests. That means that on our website, we provide a summary of each approved data request. It includes the research purpose and identifies the approved users. So there is a table on the website that lists some basic information about who applied, the PI, what they applied for, and it includes actually a link to their approved application. It does not include a link to any supplemental material, such as their CVs or IRB approval, but it does include their basic application. The original investigator is notified when a request for their data is approved, so they're notified when their data has been applied for, but also we let them know if it's been approved, and it's within 5 business days of the approval. So this is what it looks like on the PCORI website. There is a approved request tab in the menu at the top, and it lists out in this table the name of the approved user, the name of the data, the purpose of the research, and this will also include the link to their annual summary of all findings, including negative findings. So it sort of houses everything together so folks can see what research is being done on the data and who's doing it. And also when folks use the data, if they publish, they're required to use a citation. So those would also be listed in those data-related publications that you saw on the first homepage slide of the website. So the research findings that are required include negative findings, and we provide that summary on our website, and it's within 12 months of the approval of the data request. So that doesn't always mean that they'll be completed with their research, but it's sort of a check-in. And then they would have to repeat that every 12 months that their application has been approved for. And as I was saying, research publications, so approved users are required to acknowledge the original investigator as the primary source of the data and PCORI as the funder in all publications. And they're also provided with a data citation to show where they obtained the data through PCORI. So there's an example of a data citation on the slide here that, that shows even the DOI, so that folks who are looking at their citation can go back to the study itself. The DOI is the digital object identifier that is sort of a permanent record of the data and the version that they used at the time. So here is an example of a study page. So once the data is made available for application, it's listed on our website. If you go to the Find Data tab on the menu, you could see all the studies, or you can search by topic. And this is just the top part of the page, but I wanted to specifically highlight the data-related publications that's circled there in blue. That just helps people see what's been published on the study by the original investigator team and secondary users. It also shows how often people are downloading the documentation there over the past 3 years. And in the top where it says download, analyze online, and access restricted data, the access restricted data button there with the key would be the way that secondary users apply for this data and make their original request. So this is our contact information. Everything for PCORI at ICPSR goes through the general help email and then is assigned to me. We also have the PCORI project director here at ICPSR, Amy Pienta, who's available for questions. And I'm the project manager. There's my email there, and our website is linked here, and I also linked it in the chat. This has been a really fun project at ICPSR because, like I said, it relies on what we're experts at in the sort of data curation and dissemination, and has helped us grow and expand with the independent review committee and transparency of our restricted data applications.
Really exciting from our perspective too, seeing it grow over the past few years and seeing the studies actually available on the PCORI website.
And being used. It's been really exciting. And we know that will just continue to increase as we do the marketing campaign that John was speaking about. So we have a question about the requirement for submitting the study protocol, but is the protocol also being included with the study documentations that researchers can view and download? So everything on the list for the full data package. So everything, John had a slide that said full data package, and everything listed there is part of what is released for the data and documentation. So the data is restricted and needs to be applied for, but most of the documentation is available publicly so that people can make informed restricted data application requests. Did you have more that you wanted to say to that, John, about the study protocol from PCORI's perspective?
No, I think you answered it. I mean, I'll also add the funnel research report that is posted on PCORI's website, which is a comprehensive overview of the project, the methods, and the findings. That would also be linked to the PCORI posting of the study when that is available. To further complement like the full study picture.
Thanks for sharing that, John. That's a good point because that final research report is sort of dual linked between the PCORI website and the PCORI website. So we include that in the summary when it's available so that folks can find it more easily from both places. Any other questions or comments about this archive? John, there was a question about the PCORI data sharing policy. Can you speak to how that came to be, like how PCORI was tasked with sharing the data?
That was a little bit before my time,
Okay.
but I mean, I know that was arrived at over the course of, I think, maybe a year or two, just, kind of trying to emphasize, values of open science, that have been kind of a push amongst funders and other organizations the past 5 years. I do know that we were one of the first funders to actually approve the policy back in 2019. And over the course of the past couple of years, we've been stepwise implementing it. But I actually think I can look online. I think there's a resource that kind of outlines the development of it. There's a blog post that kind of a little timeline of how it was developed. So let me see if I can find that real quick while we wait for other questions.
Thank you. I'll also share that there is support for applying for the restricted data. So if you have questions at any time, you can reach out to that help email, and additional documentation is being developed to provide sort of an example application to highlight sort of specifically what makes a good application and what the independent review committee is looking for specifically.
So I linked in the chat a link to the public comment post that was collected as part of the policies development back in 2017. And I think there's another link somewhere that kind of complements that, where it gives some more information to the conversations after this public comment.
Well, thank you for sharing that, John. I think at this time we will wrap up the webinar. So thank you everyone for attending today and for hearing this information, especially about the ways that this archive has grown. And we look forward to more studies coming into our collection and being available on a wider range of topics. And thank you again for attending. And this will be made live on YouTube at a later date for review. Thank you so much, Don, for presenting.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.